Welcome to The Authority File, the podcast that features conversations about the life cycle of scholarly communication. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. In this series, we're going to be talking about predatory publishers. We are nothing without academic integrity, and predatory publishing practices threaten to undermine a scholarly communications environment that, these days, needs public faith and trust more than ever. My guest and I will be discussing the motives, archetypes, and deceptive practices of predatory publishers, so stay tuned in this four-part series for some valuable intel to help you safely navigate the academic publishing landscape. Joining me on this series, which is brought to you with generous support from Cabells, are Ashley Carroll, Project Manager at Cabells, Ruth Bailey, Journal Auditor, Mike Bisaccio, Director of Marketing and Communications, and Yasmeen Zubair, Journals Manager at Cabells. I should note that the Cabells team recently presented a webinar with Choice on predatory publishing, which is freely accessible on demand at the Choice Media channel on YouTube. In this first episode, we're introduced to our guests and we investigate the scene of the crime, so to speak, defining what predatory publishers are and examining their motives. Okay, welcome to the program, everyone. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Bill. Nice to be here.
Thanks, Bill.
Awesome. Okay, so why don't we start with introductions? Real quick, if you could just please, briefly describe your roles at Cabells. Ashley, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Ashley Carroll. I'm the projects manager at Cabells, and my role is to lead various company projects, particularly those that promote our brand, and I help identify opportunities for community engagement, thought leadership, and I also manage our social media platforms, and I work very closely with our marketing team.
Excellent. Thank you. Yasmeen, over to you.
Hi, I'm Yasmeen Zubair, and I am the journals manager at Cabells. My role is to manage the journals team and guide content decisions and, in general, oversee the journal updating process of our databases.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. And Ruth?
Hi, my name's Ruth Bailey. I'm a journal auditor at Cabells. I'm responsible for evaluating potentially predatory journals for inclusion in the Predatory Reports database. I'm also responsible for updating journals that we currently list in Journalytics and evaluating new titles for inclusion.
Okay. And then Michael.
Hi, thanks for having us, Bill. I'm Mike Bisaccio, Director of Marketing and Communications with Cabells. Which is really a catch-all title for a role that comes with a nice mix of projects to work on, I think, such as this one, but largely focused on customer success initiatives, which in our case means working with librarians and researchers to make sure they're able to understand, use, and promote our resources internally effectively, and also to be sure that we as a company and our tools are evolving to meet their needs from a data and information and functionality standpoint.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you, everyone. So why don't we start with a quick primer for those in the Authority File audience who may not already know, but let's define predatory publishers. And Mike, we'll start with you on that. What are they and really what are their motives?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. It's been difficult for the scholarly community to come to a comprehensive consensus definition of predatory publishers or predatory journals. Even using the term predatory to describe these operations is met with some side-eye glances. But in this context, the use of the term predatory to describe these journals or publishers was coined by Jeffrey Beal, a now retired university librarian who laid much of the groundwork in this area. And over the years, there have been groups of researchers who have looked into this topic further to understand it, try to define it. Most prominently, probably, are Sen-Yu Shen and Bo Christer Bjork, who published a study in 2015 in BMC Medicine that sought to determine, what these outfits are, how they operated, to quantify the spread of these types of publications within the research universe. A bit more recently, in 2019, a panel of publishers and scholars from 10 countries met while at a conference on predatory publishing and kind of agreed to a definition after much discussion and rounds of questionnaires, the results of which were published in the journal Nature. But again, taken together, all these definitions really point to the same basic components. These are operations engaging in deceptive, if not outright fraudulent behaviors that differ in severity and scope and nature, as we'll talk about, in an effort to appear to some degree, at least as a legitimate peer-reviewed journal. That's often the key element in play, peer review, all toward the goal of collecting fees in some shape or form, which is ultimately their motive. And essentially, this is the crux of the definition agreed upon at the conference and published in Nature I mentioned. These operations prioritize self-interest at the expense of scholarship. So I think the self-interest really refers to money. The motive isn't the damage that's done to the research at large. That's the kind of at the expense of scholarship part. That's just a very unfortunate consequence of these operations. The existing body of research upon which future research is built is compromised or diluted. But when all said and done, I think the motive is money, really.
Yeah. So just you mentioned the side eye. Is that just because the word predatory is overly dramatic, or?
I think that might be a good way to say it. Yeah. Problematic journals have been discussed. It was kind of, Jeffrey Beal did a lot of the early work in this area, and he coined it, and it kind of stuck, I guess, for lack of a better word. And so it does kind of sum up, I guess on a base level, they're, predatory operations in that they're preying on researchers, those who need to publish. But yeah, so it's gotten mixed reviews, I guess you could say.
Yeah. So what's the sort of universe, so to speak, of these journals and publishers? How many are we talking about here?
Yeah, that's another difficult question to answer definitively. I guess I can say currently at Cabells, we have identified and report on, as of this recording, 17,924 predatory journals.
Wow.
So yeah, that's a lot. Now, some of these may no longer be active, quote unquote, active, in that their website, we link to each publication's website in our reports. Their website and methods of accepting submissions, or more importantly for them, payment, may no longer be live, but it's important for sure to keep a record of each publication. One reason for us is we have a lot of department heads, other university administrators, checking publication records and CVs of potential hires or current faculty or for promotion or tenure. So we want to keep a record of these journals. I should also note we evaluate individual journals, not publishers as a whole. Some publishers, as we know, produce many, many predatory publications. An extreme example is the Omics Group, which has run hundreds of these operations, as well as predatory conferences. In fact, in 2019, they were ordered by a federal judge to pay more than $50 million to resolve charges brought against them by the Federal Trade Commission. Again, that's an extreme example, but it's not unusual for a single publisher to produce dozens of journals covering any and every topic. They're not really concerned about scholarship. Again, at the expense of scholarship is kind of one of their things. Their concern is to bring in submissions, and more accurately, the fees that go along with the submission. So we're documenting about 18,000 predatory publications at this point. It's, a little harder to nail down the number of publishers out there putting these out, or the complete universe. We are kind of reviewing, adding to this platform on a continuous basis. So it's growing.
And I imagine some of them also fall off the list as well as they get discovered, or
I think we wish that would be the case. Ideally, what we'd love is for these operations to use our findings, our reports, as a roadmap, if you will, towards legitimacy. We really don't find that's the case. We don't find that's the case. We have an appeals process in place. A journal can request a re-review of their procedures once per calendar year. We have yet to receive a successful appeal. These, publications, if we are listing them, they've earned their way onto our list. I guess you
Yeah.
could say they've are, as I'm sure we'll discuss a bit about our scoring system. It's weighted to specifically to keep newer journals or journals from developing countries off our list. They're a lower quality journal is not what we're looking for. These journals are setting out to deceive reviewers, researchers. They've kind of, like I said, earned their way, and we're not seeing any effort to use our reports to kind of clean up their act, so to speak, to, if not, become a high quality, legitimate publication, just at least not a deceptive, kind of going against standard industry practices.
Right. Excellent. Thanks, Mike. So are certain people more vulnerable to falling for journals with predatory behavior? I mean, what's really at stake here? And Ruth, why don't we go over to you on that one?
Sure. I think this is a really interesting question. It'd be easy to assume that the answer would be new career researchers who don't have as much experience in the publication
Right.
landscape, but I think it's actually a much more complicated picture. We can never know exactly why an author has submitted to a predatory journal. We don't know their exact reasons, but I think it's a mixture of people who've genuinely been duped, people who perhaps have received a soliciting email and they've seen, there's a promise of a quick publication turnaround time, relatively low article publication charges, and this might just hit their inbox at a time when they're feeling pressure to publish. They might have to publish, by the end of term, and with this arriving at exactly that time, it might just feel like, oh, okay, I'm going to overlook that this might look like it's too good to be true, and this might be an option for me to publish. I think it's also quite easy to sort of say, oh, I don't understand how people fall for these fake journals. It's so obvious when you look more closely. But I think until you've been scammed or until you've kind of been in this situation, it's really easy to say that. And the journals are obviously good at what they do because they wouldn't proliferate if that wasn't the case. They'd go off and find another way of making money. I think there's also another group of authors where I think we suspect there is a degree of complicity. We tend to see the same authors across a variety of predatory journals appearing as authors and on the editorial board. And they will often have articles that you would kind of judge as lower quality. They might be just one-page articles or, super long reference lists of self-citations. And I think in those sort of situations, it's hard to see that the author might not know what they're doing. There's some element of gaming the system, but it's definitely a varied picture. There's not just one type of author that's going to submit to a predatory journal. And in terms of what's at stake, I'd say primarily author reputation. If an author submits to a predatory journal without knowing and the article's published, then they're kind of forever linked to that journal. An author might discover during the publication process that it's a predatory journal. They might attempt to remove the article from the journal, but it's often the case that once the journal has the money from the author, that they'll either stop responding or they'll ask for more money to put, a retraction on the article or an expression of concern. So the author's then sort of stuck in this situation. Even if they discover pre-publication that it's, a suspected predatory journal, they might be asked to pay a huge withdrawal fee, in some cases more than the original article publication charge. And again, there's no guarantee that the article's then going to be removed. There's also a tendency for articles that are published in predatory journals to follow the author around. It's not unknown for an article that's been published in one journal to then be published in another predatory journal and another one. So there's that continuing link to the author. There's also the impact on the whole research landscape. You've got sort of legitimate articles which are then citing articles which are appearing in predatory publications. On the flip side, as well as the article following the author around, you might have the case that the article just completely disappears. If a journal doesn't have a good digital preservation policy, it might just disappear into the ether overnight, and then the author can't use that research again because there's no guarantee that it might not pop up somewhere else. Sometimes even as we're reviewing journal websites, they sort of rebrand themselves, rename themselves, move the articles elsewhere. So it can feel a bit like whack-a-mole sometimes, sort of trying to plan where the journal is going to pop up next. Sort of another key thing is the fact that public funds might have been spent on article publication charges. If an author's been tasked with publishing their research and it's gone to a predatory journal rather than a legitimate journal, then even if that initial research is sound, then it's going to be tarnished by being associated with a journal that doesn't perform correct peer review. So I think there's quite a lot in there that involves reputation and harm to the academic landscape.
You just heard from Ashley Carroll, Project Manager at Cabells, Ruth Bailey, Journal Auditor at Cabells, Michael Bisaccio, Director of Marketing and Communications at Cabells, and Yasmeen Zubair, Journals Manager at Cabells. This episode was brought to you with generous support from Cabells. Join us next week when we look at the ways in which the academic market is particularly vulnerable to predatory publishers and the tactics they use to lure unsuspecting researchers into their journals. As always, underwriting opportunities for the Authority File podcast are directed by Choice's advertising director, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced and edited by Choice's digital media producer, Sabrina Kofer, with support from digital media assistant Ashley Roy. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.